For joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mike Merrick. I run a business called Merrick Consulting, and we support clients across the food and ingredients sector, helping them to attract top performing talent into their businesses. I'm also joined by Darren Peck from DP Execs. Darren, if you'd give a bit of a brief introduction.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. As Mike said, my name's Darren Peck, and I'm the founder and owner of DP Execs. And we work with directors and CXOs in the technology space. And we really pride ourselves on helping businesses to make more profit, turnover, and increase the exit values by enhancing executives. So I think this is a great session for us and people that we've invited along today. And the main speaker today is going to be Jeremy. So Jeremy, I'd like to hand over to you, please.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Mike. So hi, everyone. Let me briefly introduce myself, then we'll get cracking. So my name's Jeremy Lazarus. I spent 18 years as an accountant. I had all sorts of roles. The final finance role was finance director of Yo Sushi in 1998 to 99. I quit accountancy because it was far too exciting. And of course, I'm much more interested in people than numbers. And so I set up my own coaching business. And since that point, 1999, I've been coaching and training all sorts of people, big businesses, small businesses, public sector, private sector, and also I work with elite athletes as well. So what I want to do is talk to you today about leadership, and in particular, a 360-degree tool, which I think will be incredibly useful for you. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so what are we going to cover? We're going to cover why, very briefly, why is leadership assessment and development so useful and important? What is the leadership circle profile? Why is it different? Why is it different days from other 360-degree profiling tools? The 8 categories within the leadership circle profile, and you see there 5 plus 3. I'll keep you curious a bit longer to explain what that 5 plus 3 is about. Using the information within the leadership circle profile, the main uses of it, and the procedures or steps and costings and next steps. So some of this is going to be very, very obvious. I'm going to go through some bits very quickly. Other bits I'm going to take a bit more time over. So why assess and why develop leaders? Well, here are some reasons. I'm sure you can think of others for yourself. So leadership is a key factor in the success of any organization. Ineffective leaders can cost lots of money. So if you've got poor leaders at the top, they're going to make bad decisions, not going to take people with them. And it's painful for people involved, which ultimately costs money. And good leadership assessment can identify potential leaders and highlight development needs for existing and prospective leaders. Also, it encourages retention of good staff. So if people know there's a pathway, the leadership pathway, they'll be more likely, I think, to stay within an organization. In terms of the underpinning information and research for this particular talk, there's a book there you see. I've got my own copy here, I don't know if you can see it. It's called Mastering Leadership by Anderson and Adams. I'm not on commission for this book, by the way. And if you're interested in leadership, this is definitely a book to get. It's almost like a synthesis of most, if not all, of the main leadership theories that are available. And it pulls it all together in a model which I'm going to talk through as we go through today. So, yeah, Mastering Leadership by Anderson and Adams. So what is the leadership circle profile? It's a 360-degree leadership assessment stroke development tool. It's referred to as a universal model of leadership, incorporating numerous leadership theories. It can also be used to assess and develop the leadership culture within an organization and leadership teams. It can identify areas for development and, more importantly, how to do it. So what to focus on for a given leader, if he or she wants to develop themselves. And there's a correlation, there's a strong correlation between the leadership circle profile and leadership effectiveness and business performance. So it's really useful. It's not just a theoretical tool. There's evidence that this is really correlated to leadership effectiveness and business performance. Why is it different from other 360-degree tools and assessment tools? Well, firstly, it's solely for leaders. And by the way, I'm assuming that people watching know what 360-degree assessment is. It's for, it's someone gets assessed by their people above them, below them, and their peers. So it's an all-round. So this one is solely for leaders. So it looks at leadership competencies, not just generic behaviours, as many 360-degree tools look at. It assesses three, now a bit of jargon, I'll go into this in more detail later, 3 reactive tendencies. So these are tendencies that leaders display that are not useful in the long term. Most 360-degree feedback tools focus on the desired competencies or traits. And of course, those are covered, the 5 creative competencies. One of the things that makes this tool different is it also identifies the behaviors and the attitudes and responses that are not helpful to reactive. And you'll see in brackets there, the 11 plus 18 subcategories. So there are 11 subcategories of the reactive and 18 subcategories of the creative. And again, this will become clearer when I show you the actual the model a bit later. What it does, it compares the scores of an individual. So Mike, I'm going to use you as an example. If you were to do this, your scores would be compared to a global database of over 100,000 leaders. And one of the key things within that is that it converts the raw scores into percentages. So for example, if one of the competencies were communication skills, for example, if you score 4 out of 5, is that a good score? Well, if everyone else scores 3.5 out of 5, yes, then 4 is good. But if everyone else scores 4.5, then the score's not so good. So what this tool does is it converts the raw scores into percentages compared to the 100,000 plus leaders globally. And it gives some overall effective leadership effectiveness scores. So you get scores 0 to 100, how effective you are as a leader, which, could be challenging if you get a score that's, 5, 10, 15%. At least you know, though. At least you know, and this model gives you something you can do about it. Other reasons why it's different from other assessment tools, as I mentioned earlier, it correlates to leadership effectiveness and business performance. And there's a very extensive guide to assist people who are coaching and developing the individual leaders. So Mike, I've used you as an example. If I were to be coaching you, there's a guide that will help me to really focus in on the key points that would make you an even more effective leader. Okay.
Jeremy, can I just jump in? We've got a question that's come in here. And the question is that giving the different scores that people can get, then is that something that you can then use for appraisals or for coaching in different areas in the report?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously there's ethical issues around appraisals per se, using 360s and assessment tools for appraisals. But in terms of coaching, absolutely. Absolutely. Whatever the scores are, unless someone scores 100% on everything, and even if they score 100%, you can say, okay, what would make it even better? Yep. For most people, they're not going to score 100% on everything. It will highlight the areas for improvement and what they're already good at, so they can do even more of it.
Great.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for that question. So let's move on. So in summary, the highlighted areas there, the highlighted points, are the key reasons, I think, why the leadership circle profile is different from others. Okay, so Darren, Mike, are there any other questions? Or
this one other question popped up in the chat box, Jeremy. That was in terms of the database of 100,000 leaders.
Yeah.
How has that been compiled, and is that across various different industry sectors?
Yeah. So basically, the developers, so Anderson and Adams, they've got their team, the Leadership Circle organization. They've done this, I don't know exactly how long, but for several years, and they've developed the database of leaders who've gone through this program. In terms of industries, it's across industry, across sector. Okay. And I think one point here is that I think leadership is you can be a leader, with an effective leader, without necessarily being a specialist in a particular industry. So if you're an effective leader, you can move from industry to industry. You can pick up the knowledge about how the automotive industry works or how the restaurant industry works. Leadership skills are leadership skills, which of course can be developed. I think they go across context though.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. So I want to move on now to a little bit more detail. I mentioned the creative and the reactive competencies. What I want to do is let's look at the creative competencies first. Now these, so bit of jargon here, creative, you see it's in inverted commas. Think of these as useful leadership competencies. And the word creative, the reason this word is used is that an effective leader will help create the environment that he or she wants around them. Whereas reactive, they'll tend to react to circumstances. Okay, so the creative competencies are, first one there is relating, and you see in brackets there, bringing out the best in people, groups and organizations. Self-awareness, so people who are into ongoing development and I've got in a self-awareness. Authenticity, ability to relate to others, authentic, courageous, and with a high degree of integrity. And leadership is an expression of your true self if you score high on authenticity. Systems awareness. So awareness is focused on the whole system improvement and on community welfare, not just on, for example, profits. It's a bigger picture. And then achieving. So they offer visionary, authentic, and high achievement leadership. It's about getting results. It's not all about relating and being nice. There's also a focus on results. And different leadership models will be not dissimilar to this. This is, I'm sure if any of you, those of you watching, these are not a surprise to you. Okay. Mike, down, any questions on this, or should we move on?
Nothing. Okay.
No. So let's now look at the reactive tendencies. So remember, these tendencies can get results in the short term. It's just that they've been proven not to be effective for long-term results. And generally, these reactive tendencies are developed in early years to fulfill a child's natural need for security and belonging. So this is based, a lot of this is based on adult development, theories of adult development, primarily by Robert Keegan. So the first one I'll talk about is complying. So complying broadly is where the leader will comply with expectations. They won't rock the boat. They won't necessarily speak up and really challenge things. They'll go with the flow more than is helpful. Protecting. So this is the idea here is that they remain withdrawn or distant or hidden, a bit aloof. It's almost like, well, look, I know the answer. If you guys can't see, my way of thinking, I'm not even going to bother wasting time with you. It's a little bit like that, very aloof, cynical, superior, and or highly rational. And then controlling. So this is about, I guess, power over people rather than power with people. So it's results are so important to them that they'll do it almost at the expense of relationships. It's about power and control. Okay, so now within these 3 reactive tendencies, there are 11 subcategories, and similarly with the creative, there are 18 subcategories. So any questions at this point before I go into what the report actually looks like?
No more questions.
Good. Okay, so I'm now going to come out of this and go into this. Now I'm about to, in a moment, show you what the actual report looks like. It's in a graphical form and in a circle. There's a lot of information on it. So when you see it, just relax. I will show you, I'll explain the information to you. So this is what it looks like. And you can see it's in the form of a circle. That it's called the leadership circle. You'll see it's split into two halves. At the top, there's creative. I'll zoom in so you can see the details in a minute. There's the creative half at the top. There's the reactive half at the bottom. On the left, there's relationship. On the right, there's task. And there's, if you look at here at 9 o'clock, so you see the bar there, this will show you to what extent the leader has a creative or a reactive score. And at the bottom, it will show to what extent how effective they are as leaders, leadership effectiveness. Okay, there's a couple of other bars which if there's time I'll come to later. So looking at the graph, what you've got the very inner circle, the black dot that says identity. That's the person who they really are. There's an inner circle and an outer circle. The inner circle is a summary of the outer circle. And you'll see the green bits, the green shaded areas, are the scores that the evaluators, so Bob Jones here, you see it's a sample report for Bob Jones. Bob would have at least 7 people who are evaluating him, going online to fill out a questionnaire that takes 20 to 30 minutes. And the green bits are the score. The thick black lines are Bob's self-score. Okay, so immediately you can see that there are certain gaps between Bob's self-score and the scores of the other people, the evaluators. So that's something that could be highlighted. What we'll do, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit on the creative section, and you'll see here relating, self-aware. Mike, Darren, can you see this? Is if I zoom this big enough?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's good.
You can see the upper circle, so relating, self-awareness, authenticity, systems awareness, achieving. And then on the outside, there are subsections. So for example, with relating, I'm not going to go through all these, but you can see there are 5 subcomponents that go into relating. For self-awareness, there are 4 subcomponents, etc., etc. And you'll also see, let me just make it even bigger. You can see the numbers there, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, etc. Those are the percentages. So if we just take, let's just take the top segment here, authenticity. You can see if you look in the bottom, I'm just going to scroll this up slightly. So in the inner circle, the score is about 24 to 25%. And that's made up of courageous authenticity, which is 30%. In other words, 70% of leaders score higher in courageous authenticity. With integrity, the score is 20, therefore 80% of leaders score higher. Okay, so this is what I meant when I said it turns the raw scores into percentages compared to other global leaders. Okay, and you know, we could do this with all of them if the principles are the same for each segment. I'm just going to make this smaller. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, the reactive half, and you can see there complying, protecting, controlling, which is the categories I mentioned before. And we'll just take one of these. We'll take complying. There are 4 sub areas. There are 3 for protecting and 4 for controlling. And again, you can see that in the complying area, the scores are pretty high. The green areas are pretty high. So you'll see that shown in the summary in the inner circle. Similarly, the black scores, the scores in black, are fairly high as well. So if you just want to look at the summary, there's the inner circle. If you want the detail, there's the outer circle. And what this shows me, if I were coaching Bob Jones, what this shows me, firstly, his reactive creative score is only 30%. He thinks he's about 10%, others call him 30. And there are areas for him to work on. And looking at this, the bottom corner here, if I make it text slightly bigger, this area here, passive, is a very high score. And Darren, Mike, are you ready for a little bit more information? Can you cope with this?
We can cope.
Well, then,
All right. So I'm going to now show you another diagram, and what this is going to show, it's basically, you see it's similar to this, but it gives correlations to leadership effectiveness. And you can see here, this passive section of minus 0.66, that's the highest negative correlation. So if someone scores high on passive, that's going to have a significant impact on their leadership effectiveness. Whereas if they score high, let's say on, if you can see this on conservative at just around about 9 o'clock, it's minus 0.3, sorry, 0.03, it's almost insignificant. So knowing this as I do and having access to this, we've got 0.66, 0.55 for distance. Those are the two biggest negative correlations in reactive. Going back to Bob Jones, you can see passive and distance here. These are two that I'd want to work on with Bob. So as a coach, it gives me and him very, very clear feedback. We may not like the feedback, but the feedback's the feedback. Now, within this, so there's, I have access to a manual which would go into detail about each of these 29, but particularly, certainly passive and distance. So I could highlight the sort of behavioral tendencies that Bob would have, and I'd coach him around it. Now, I'm not going to go into details of how I'd coach him, but basically this gives a lot of information about how to coach someone. And just to say, it's not always about working on the areas for improvement. Sometimes it'll be working on the effect on the scores where people are scoring high on creative. So, for example, with Bob here, he scores high on mentoring and development around about sort of 9:30. Yeah. Well, we'd look at that and see how he could do even more of it to leverage on his strength. So, I know there's a lot of information here. Darren, Mike, any questions from you or any of the attendees?
Yeah, there's a question here that's been put into the Q&As. Yeah. Is that can these scores be affected by persons' current experiences or things that are happening in their life currently that maybe catching them on a good or a bad day would come out as different results?
Sure. So yes, I think obviously that can be a factor, and this is that's for the self score. So that could change, but when you've got, remember there needs to be at least 7 people doing the evaluation. I would recommend 10 to 15. So once you've got 10 to 15 people, it's unlikely that they're all going to be having a bad day.
Yes.
So that would give you, and it would, I mean, I've seen one situation where someone only picked 7 evaluators, and one of them was an ex-boss who he left that organization on really bad terms. So the ex-boss, the scores clearly skewed the overall score. So I would say pick a representative sample, but have at least 10 to 15.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of choosing evaluators, how does one go through that process?
So there's I think 5 categories. There's boss and boss's boss.
Yeah.
Now those two are they're pretty obvious who that would be, I would suggest. There's peers, there's direct reports, and there's others. So I would talk with the individual person. Let's say Bob Jones here. I'd want him to pick a representative sample of people from each of those areas. And just to be clear, the responses are confidential, so you can't attribute any scores, with the exception, obviously, of boss and boss's boss, because there's only one boss, only one boss's boss.
Sure.
For the others, it's confidential. So yeah, pick a representative sample. There's no point picking all your mates who are, are going to give you good scores, because it's not real. I'm assuming people want to be adult here and really and get an honest reflection so they can improve and become even more effective. Mike, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to stop. Actually, we go back to the PowerPoint. So from current slide. Okay, so what I'm going to suggest you do is just to reflect. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to this. You can see on the right-hand side here, the traits, the main, the 8 traits, the 5 plus 3. So just to reflect for yourself, with what you know of yourself, which creative competency do you think is your strongest, the highest score? And which would be your least strong in the green creative? And which reactive tendency do you think would be your lowest score and your highest score? Remember, highest score for reactive is going to be least useful. You don't want to be getting 95% on reactive, ideally. Okay, so I'm just going to pause for just a couple of minutes, just to give you time to reflect on this and to ask yourself, what are some of the actions and insights that you could take from this exercise? So I'm just going to be quiet for a few moments to let you do that. Just another couple of moments, folks, please. Okay, so if you could finish off there, and obviously if you need more time, you can go back and look at this afterwards. So I'm just wondering what insights and comments or questions you have, and I realise this is might be very private, so you might not wish to share some of these. I do request that you reflect on this for yourself. Mike down, if there are any insights or comments that people are making, please let me know. If not, we'll move on.
No, nothing in the chat room.
Sorry?
There's no questions in this chat here.
Okay.
Sorry, there's one of the questions come up over here is in terms of using this as a tool for self-evaluation,
mm-hmm.
How accurate and how useful is that?
Okay, so I think, well, one of the categories is self-awareness.
Sure.
So it depends how self-aware you are, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's useful. It makes you think. So and I'll talk later about how everyone can do a free self-assessment. So they can go online and I'll give them the link. They can do a free self-assessment. And I think it's useful to do that because it will make you think about, what you can improve, what you're doing, that's good already. I think it's more useful to get someone else, to go through the full process, because then you get some reality around it. And in answer to your question, I think it gives you some benefit. It is useful up to a point.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. No, thank you. Okay. Are we good to move on, Mike and Darren? Guess we are. Okay, fine. So let's look now at some of the main uses of this. And I'm sure this will not be a big surprise to people. So it's useful for leaders to seek coaching to improve the scores to become even more effective as a leader. So leaders can get coaching to improve the scores. Recruiters could use this as part of an assessment process. Obviously, be mindful of the ethics around using any assessment tool for, for recruitment purposes. HR directors, CEOs, you could assess the strengths and development needs of existing leaders or prospective leaders and leadership teams. And there are probably some other uses that other people can think of. I mean, I know Mike and Darren, you've been in recruitment for many, many years. But other thoughts around other uses apart from the ones I've mentioned?
Yeah, we've got someone here who's commented that it would be, we some of the people who are online here with us are involved in the private equity space or venture capital space.
Oh, yes.
And so, someone said here that it would be really good when you're assessing either investing in or taking over a business, that you could look at the people in the business and see where they're at and see where you can either, really help them to get them where they need to get to, or have the conversation, are they going to get there, frankly?
Yeah, absolutely. Private equity, absolutely. Investors, yeah. Mike, anything from you or
nothing on the side note at the moment?
Yeah. I know we've spoken about this. I think, yeah, it's pretty extensive. So, so just a little bit about the process. So if somebody wanted to have the leadership circle, if an individual wanted to do it, Bob Jones, for example, you identify at least 7 respondents or evaluators, and we've kind of touched on that, the sort of people that would be. Everyone does an online questionnaire, which takes 20 to 30 minutes. There's 124 questions, and it's on a scale of 0 to 5. So there'll be a question, and then you rank it 0 to 5, basically. Then, once the reports are pulled off, there'd be a 90 to 120 minute debrief with an accredited leadership circle profile coach, highlighting the areas to work on. For example, where there are big gaps between the self-score and the evaluator score, where there are high reactive scores, especially where there's high correlations, like, for example, I mentioned passive minus 0.66 or distance minus 0.55. Those are areas that you definitely want to look at. Low creative scores and high creative scores, actually, to build on the strengths. I know this is going to be recorded. Well, this is recorded. I just want to share a personal story. So I qualified in this in April 2019, and my score was 74%, which was a bit of a relief, because if I'm going to be a leadership coach, hopefully the scores will be reasonably okay. And whilst there were some reactive areas to work on, absolutely, there were some high scores, and one of those was around relationships. So I tend to build pretty reasonable relationships with people. And so the coach or the trainer on the call said to me, build on this. Rather than necessarily focusing on the things you're not quite so good at, build on your strengths, work on your strengths. And all I can say is 2019 was my best financial year. And 2020, despite COVID, touch wood, is pretty good too. Now, maybe that's a coincidence, but I've made an effort to focus on my strengths. So there are different ways that the scores could be used, and the coach who takes you through this will help highlight these for you. There's optional follow-on coaching. So could have probably sort of 2 or 3 or 5 or 10. It depends on, that's to be negotiated by the individual leader and the coach. So, Mike, Darren, are there any questions on the process?
So actually, just before Mike, sorry, Mike, someone's made a comment here rather than a question. And it says you can't always be all things to all men. Sometimes it's important to know what your strengths are, and get other people to help you manage a business or manage a team in areas where you're perhaps not so strong. That's a really great point.
No, I totally agree. And again, this is the sort of thing that can be brought out as part of the coaching. So, for example, if mentoring and leadership, mentoring and development is one of your strengths, then leverage on that to help other people to fit, to develop, to fill in your inverted commas gaps.
Yeah,
absolutely. So, and I think, it's, we look at it overall, we look at the score overall, and it's a discussion between the coach and the individual client about what he or she wants to work on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Darren. Does that answer the point?
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Mike, was there something you were going to add?
Yes, if you're doing a leadership assessment for an organisation, the reports that are produced, are they shared with the people in the organisation who've asked for that to be done, as well as the individual as well?
So I think with all of these kind of 360 and assessment tools, it's what's agreed up front. I think best practice is that it's shared. Well, okay. No, so I don't say, I'm not sure if I can say this definitively. I know for me, I would only share it with the individual unless he gave permission for other people to see it. If he was or she were happy for other people to see it, fine. It kind of goes against my personal grain to share this kind of information. And as I say, if there's permission from the evaluator, from Bob Jones, from the individual leader, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I think it's important though that the people who see it understand what it means. So the risk of if I would have given you that circle 20 minutes or half an hour ago without explaining it, you wouldn't necessarily know what it meant. I've gone through a 3-day intense training on this, plus some follow-up. It's, if I just give it to you, you could jump to the wrong conclusions, which could be detrimental both to the individual and to the organisation.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay, so taking this forward. So in terms of costing, I started to talk about costing. So the initial package would, for the assessment tool, all the setup and everything, plus the up to 2 hours of debrief, that's up £1,500 plus that. Obviously, ongoing coaching is by agreement, depends on how many sessions, where it is, is it on Zoom, is it face-to-face, etc. If I mentioned there's a free self-assessment, so anyone can go on, I'll give you the website address, it's not my website, it's a leadership circle, anyone can go on and do the free self-assessment. Takes about 20 to 30 minutes, and you get the report, you get the graph, and you'd also get, I think, a 13, 14, 15 page sort of written report with all the numbers and the and any explanation as well. So you get quite an in-depth report. There's the link. If you go on to the leadershipcircle.com, you can search for it there. If you, I'm just going to sort of hesitate, pause while people make note of it.
And Jeremy, is it okay if we send this link out to the people that are online as well afterwards?
Completely, absolutely. Yeah. This is publicly available knowledge.
So,
absolutely.
So what we'll do is we'll make sure that we email everybody online with that URL after the webinar. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
And just to say, so I checked. This was a link a couple of days ago. From time to time they change it, so I apologise if they change it. But it'll be on the leadershipcircle.com website.
Right. We'll test it first, but we'll get it out to everybody.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So I'm prepared to offer a free debrief for 3 people. So 3 people go online, do this self-assessment, and then send the information to me. I will spend half hour, 45 minutes with them, take it completely free of charge. If there's more than 3 people apply, I'll draw lots, unless Darren and Mike, you want to do it, but I'm happy for them to contact me directly.
Okay.
And we'll put a deadline. So in the email, Mike or Darren, can you put like a week's deadline from today? I'll leave it open.
We'll do.
Yeah. The other thing I think which is important to be mindful of is there is a team option, which firstly you can look at the lead. All the leaders could do the leadership circle, and you can compare the team, but you can also look at the culture. So what this version measures is the current culture versus a desired culture. It's using the same metrics into the same circle, but what you get is people who are answering the questions do the same questions. I think it's 64 questions, the same 64 questions twice. The first time is how are things at the moment, and the second is how would they like it to be. And unsurprisingly, you'll get people want lower reactive scores and higher creative scores. So what this does is, and there's lots of detail behind that, it opens a door for leadership development as a team, as a group, to be working with leadership groups. And they can't argue with information because often it's them filling out the forms. So it's their information. So that's one of the beauties of this. Now you can also link to that. You can, and I've done this in organisations, it's very interesting actually. You get the leaders assessing themselves. Let's say there's a team of 6. Let's say the 6 leaders assess themselves using the current versus desired model. You get the 1 or 2 levels down assessing the leaders. So you compare the leaders, what they think of themselves, compared to what the people who report to them think of them, which can be very interesting for obvious reasons. I think, so I would say this, wouldn't I? I'm going to say it anyway. I think it takes a lot of guts to do this. I think it takes a lot of guts for a leader to do this assessment, knowing that sure, the score could be 80 or 90, or it could be 5, 10, 15. And even if the score is 5, 10 or 15, the point is, at least you'll know about it and you can do something. Because if it is 5, 10 or 15%, it's there anyway. And you're not being as effective as you could be as a leader. So at least if you do this, you can do something about it. You can get some coaching, you can develop yourself to become the most effective leader you can possibly be. And yeah, I've got a vested interest in saying this, and even if you never do it with me, do it with a different coach, I don't mind. For yourselves as leaders, this is really useful.
There's a comment here, Jeremy, where someone's put, that seems like a really brave thing to do. But if there are some positive changes, you could get massive buy-in from the organisation.
Absolutely. It's all, yeah. If someone goes from, if Bob Jones, right, if he goes from 30 to 65%, which is feasible in a year and a half of working at it, developing, that is great for the organisation, because he's going to be a more effective leader. And for his own career prospects, even if the organisation, for whatever reason, is not right for him, he can take those new skills, that new awareness, to a different organisation. And I know, Mike Dowan, your recruiters, my guess is that if you've got someone who's clearly working on him or herself as a leader and is really striving to be the best he or she can be, I guess that's got to be a positive. Is that, I mean,
it's a huge positive. And I think organisations always look at people who are trying to, from a leadership and the skills, continually improve themselves. If someone goes through this, it gives them a huge amount of information about themselves that, as you say, they can then start to work on.
Exactly.
And also, if someone's doing this and they've done it for themselves, then they can really show how they're different from the crowd, and where their key skills are, and where I can really add value to your organisation,
exactly.
based on this information.
Yeah, and look, it's not me saying it; it's my peers, it's my boss, it's my direct reports. So, yeah, I would say it, wouldn't I? And I stick with it. I think it's really helpful and useful. So, I'm sort of getting fairly close to the end There's my contact details. Are there any questions at this point, Mike, down from you, or anything you want to? I know Mike, Dan, we've spoken about this a little bit. Anything you want to ask or say or add in?
I think no real questions. I think one thing that I've gleaned from this, and having worked in recruitment for many years and seen lots of different assessment tools, I think this is by far the most in-depth tool. And I think it's not just this in-depth, but it can be utilized someone to help improve themselves and improve their career opportunities and prospects beyond where they currently are. Yeah. So I'm really grateful for you taking the time out today for this. It's been really great insight. Thank you.
That's a pleasure. Thank you both for asking me.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of comments in here that say thank you very much. Very informative, really interesting stuff. Really appreciate your time. So thanks very much from me as well, Jeremy.
A pleasure. Thanks everyone for watching as well. Thank you all.
Firstly, thanks again to Jeremy, and also thanks to everyone who's taken the time out today to sit through a fascinating talk and the questions. Hopefully we've answered them all. And again, thank you, and thank you, Darren, for being here as well.
Thanks. And just to add to that, what we'll do, as promised, we'll send a copy of this recording to everybody, and also the link that Jeremy spoke about. So we'll get that out to everybody in the next few days.